Welcome back to the Victorian Bone Archive. I'm your guide through the darkest corners of medical history, where good intentions met brutal reality, and where the line between healer and harbinger blurred beyond recognition. Today's story isn't about a procedure or a cure. It's about isolation as so complete it becomes its own kind of death. If these stories matter to you, if you want to keep this channel digging through history's medical horrors, please subscribe. Your support keeps these voices from being forgotten. Now, let me tell you about a man who chose to become a monster so he could pretend to be a savior. Dr. Nathaniel Finch wore death on his face for 40 days. The mask came first. That was the agreement. £4 sterling a week, lodging provided, no family contact permitted. London was dying, 1/4 of its people already in plague pits, and the parish needed men willing to walk through doors marked with red crosses, not to heal. Everyone understood this, to confirm, to count, to arrange collection. He became Nathaniel Finch on a Thursday in September 1665. The mask was fitted in a former cooperage that smelled of old wine and fresh panic. The artificer, a German man with steady hands and watering eyes, measured his skull, his nose length, the distance between his temples. The beak stretched 14 inches from face to tip, curved like a raptor's, leather-bound and sealed with wax at every seam. Inside, a chamber packed with crushed lavender, mint leaves, camphor shavings, rose petals gone brown at the edges, whole cloves that clicked when he moved his head. The miasma theory demanded it. Bad air carried plague. Good smells filtered corruption. The leather hood buckled tight behind his skull. The glass eye lenses fogged immediately with his breath. "Breathe shallow," the artificer said. "You'll learn." But Nathaniel Finch, his real name, his dead name now, didn't want to learn. He wanted to stop breathing entirely. 2 years since Catherine left. 2 years since he'd held Margaret, watched her small fingers grab at his spectacles, heard her laugh. The practice had failed, because he'd treated coal heavers and laundresses for free while the merchants' wives went elsewhere. Catherine had begged him to change. He'd refused on principle. She'd taken their daughter to Bristol and married a man who understood money. The mask made him someone else. That was the gift. The leather coat hung to his ankles, stiff with beeswax treatment, heavy as chainmail. The wide-brimmed hat, the wooden cane, not for walking, for pointing, for keeping distance between himself and the infected. The artificer handed him a small wooden case, lancets for draining buboes, herbs for poultices, a vial of vinegar for washing hands, a ledger for recording names and addresses of the dead. "You'll lodge at the old tannery past Aldgate," the parish clerk said, not looking at the mask. No one looked at the mask. "Food delivered daily. Stay there when not working. This is the agreement." Nathaniel tried to nod. The beak dipped forward like a drinking bird. The first house was on Whitechapel Road, red cross painted on the door. "Lord have mercy upon us," written beneath in hasty whitewash. The constable unlocked it and stepped back. Nathaniel entered alone. 3 bodies. A woman, perhaps 30, sprawled across the threshold between kitchen and parlor, as if she'd been crawling toward water. 2 children in a bed upstairs, small enough that their ages were ambiguous. 6? 8? The buboes were obvious, swollen lumps in groin and neck, some burst and weeping, others black and hard as walnuts. The smell, shit and sweat and something sweetly rotten underneath. He recorded the names from papers found on a table. Mary Goodwin, Samuel Goodwin, Elizabeth Goodwin. He wrote plague next to each, noting locations of swellings, state of decomposition. The children couldn't have been dead more than a day. The mother, perhaps too, which meant she'd died first and they'd starved, or she'd died trying to reach them, or the cane slipped from his grip. The tip landed in a puddle of fluid leaking from the mother's skirts. When he bent to retrieve it, the herbs inside the beak shifted, released a fresh wave of camphor. His eyes watered, the glass lenses fogged completely. He straightened, breathing shallow, counting to 10 until the fog cleared. Outside, he told the constable, 3 dead. Send Cray with the cart. His voice sounded strange inside the beak, muffled, distant, like speaking through water. The constable made a note. Other houses today? How many? 7 more on your route. 11 bodies by sunset. Nathaniel marked doors, recorded names, described symptoms he'd only read about in medieval texts, pestis bubonica. The Black Death returned after 300 years of mercy. Some of the bodies were fresh enough that they still looked like people, faces recognizable, expressions frozen in pain or confusion. Others had been dead long enough that the rats had visited. Those he recorded quickly, mechanically, breathing so shallow he started to feel lightheaded. The tannery lodging was exactly what it sounded like. A single room above where hides had once been cured, windows overlooking a courtyard filled with empty racks, a bed, a table, a chamber pot, 1 chair, a small fireplace. Food was already there, bread, cheese, a jug of ale, cold meat pies. He ate standing, still wearing the mask. Removing it felt dangerous. Not because of plague, he knew he'd likely be infected within days regardless, but because removing it meant becoming Nathaniel Finch again, the man who'd failed his wife, the man who'd chosen principles over his daughter's welfare. Better to be Peste, the plague doctor, the birdman, the death counter who served a purpose. By day 8, he'd forgotten what air tasted like without herbs. The camphor and clove oil permeated everything, his clothes, his hair, his tongue. Food tasted like medicine. Water tasted like potpourri. At night, he removed the mask only to sleep, and even then the smell lingered in his nostrils, invaded his dreams. Thomas Cray came daily with his cart, a thick-shouldered man in his 50s, face permanently set in grim acceptance. He rang a handbell as he walked, calling, "Bring out your dead," in a voice worn smooth by repetition. He never spoke to Nathaniel beyond logistics. How many? Where? Wrapped or loose? But on day 8, Cray left an extra bottle of wine beside the evening food delivery. No note, no explanation, just wine that Nathaniel drank alone while watching plague fires burn in the distance, corpses by the cartload, flaming through the night because the burial grounds were full. The work was repetitive. Enter houses, count bodies, note stages of decay, mark doors, report to constables, return to tannery, eat, sleep fitfully, wake to church bells tolling another burial. The mask became familiar. The weight of it. The restricted vision. He could see straight ahead through the glass lenses, but peripherally was blind. The sound of his own breathing amplified inside the beak, a constant reminder of air moving in and out, carrying or not carrying the seeds of death. People reacted to him in predictable ways. Children screamed, adults stepped into doorways or turned down alleys. A woman threw stones, a man spat. He understood. He looked like a demon. The beaked mask, the black coat, the wide hat shadowing his face. He was death-walking London streets in a costume designed to fight death. The irony wasn't lost on him. Some patients were still alive when he arrived. Fevered, delirious, covered in swellings. He tried to treat them according to his limited knowledge, lance the buboes, apply poultices of onion and butter, encourage water intake. Most died anyway. A few survived. He marked both outcomes in his ledger with equal dispassion. On day 12, a woman grabbed his wrist as he was recording her husband's death. Her grip was hot, her eyes yellow with jaundice. "Am I dying?" she asked. "Yes," Nathaniel said. She nodded and released him. "Thank you for honesty." He marked her door and moved on. Day 15 brought the first hallucination. He was eating cold pork, bread, ale, when he heard Catherine's voice behind him. "You always ate too quickly." He turned. Empty room. The voice had been clear, precise, irritated in the exact way she'd been irritated about small habits during their marriage. He searched the corners, checked behind the door. Nothing. "Camphor poisoning," he said aloud to no one. "Toxic inhalation." But he didn't remove the mask, couldn't. The rule was clear. Plague doctors were infected by assumption, isolated by necessity. Removing the mask meant admitting he was still Nathaniel Finch, and Nathaniel Finch had nothing to return to. The voices came more frequently after that. Catherine in moments of quiet, Margaret laughing. He hadn't heard her laugh in 2 years, but his mind provided the sound anyway, high and delighted. Sometimes William Barrow, the butcher from day 9 who died raving about spoiled meat, muttering prices and cuts and no good, all rot, throw it in the pit. By day 20, Nathaniel was having conversations with people who weren't there. He knew they weren't there. The knowledge didn't stop him from responding. "I did my best," he told hallucination Catherine while writing death reports. "Your best bankrupted us," she replied. "I helped people. You helped yourself feel righteous. We starved for your pride." He had no answer for that. It was probably true. The mask became Corvus on day 25. He'd been staring at it, removed briefly for cleaning, and the beak looked back like a living thing. Black leather, curved and cruel, glass eyes reflecting firelight. "What are you?" he asked. "What are you?" the mask seemed to reply. "Still pretending you're helping?" "I'm documenting, recording. Someone has to count the dead." "You're hiding. You took this job to die with purpose instead of dying alone with debt." Nathaniel put the mask back on. Inside the beak, surrounded by dying herbs and toxic vapors, he felt safer than he had in years. The breaking point came on day 30 with little Alice Heath. 8 years old, fever broken, buboes beginning to heal. One of perhaps 20 survivors he'd witnessed. Her mother had died. Her father was missing. She was alone in a house that smelled like death and vinegar. "I'm not going to hurt you," Nathaniel said through the mask. Alice stared at the beak, at the black leather, at the glass eyes that showed nothing of the man beneath. "Take it off," she whispered. He shouldn't have. Protocol forbade unnecessary exposure, but she was 8 and terrified, and he'd spent 30 days as a monster. He unbuckled the hood, removed the mask. The air hit his face like cold water, real air, untainted by herbs, shocking in its ordinariness. Alice screamed. She screamed so loudly that neighbors came running. She pointed at his face, gaunt from weight loss, eyes bloodshot from chemical exposure, chemical burns around his nose and mouth where wax seal had leaked, and screamed, "Devil! Devil bird! He's the devil!" They pulled her away. Nathaniel stood alone in the plague house, mask in his hands, understanding finally what he'd become. That night he found a mirror in his lodging, studied the face. It didn't look like Nathaniel Finch. It looked like something halfway between man and corpse, something that had forgotten it was human. He put the mask back on. It fit better than his own skin. Day 32 arrived with fever. Nathaniel woke soaked in sweat, sheets clinging to skin that felt simultaneously burning and frozen. He didn't need to check. The signs were obvious, the headache splitting his skull, the nausea rising in waves, the deep ache in his groin and neck that meant the lymph nodes were already swelling. He pressed fingers to the sides of his throat. There, hard lumps, tender, growing. The plague had finally come for him. He'd known it would. Everyone knew. Plague doctors lasted weeks, maybe months if fortunate. The mask didn't protect. Nothing protected. The miasma theory was wrong. He understood this now, though he couldn't articulate why. Disease spread through contact, through proximity, through the air infected. People breathed out, and healthy people breathed in. The herbs did nothing. The leather coat did nothing. The distance he'd tried to maintain did nothing. But he put on the mask anyway, buckled it tight. The camphor smell made him gag, and he vomited into the chamber pot. Thin bile, nothing solid. He hadn't eaten properly in days. The hallucinations made food impossible. Catherine sat across from him at meals, commenting on his appearance, his choices, his failures. Margaret played in corners that were empty. William Barrow recited meat prices in his sleep. "You're dying," Corvus said. The mask spoke now in his father's voice, dead 15 years, stern and disappointed. "What will you do?" "Work," Nathaniel said, "while I can." "Why?" "Because stopping means admitting this meant nothing." He went out. 7 houses that day, 15 dead, 3 still dying. He lanced buboes with shaking hands, applied useless poultices, recorded names in handwriting that deteriorated with each entry. The letters sprawled across pages, illegible, desperate. One woman, Agnes Morley, seamstress 42, surviving against odds, asked his name. He stared at her through fogged glass lenses, tried to remember. The answer wouldn't come. "Peste," he finally said. "Dr. Pest. Your Christian name?" "Nothing." The mask had eaten it. "I don't recall," he admitted. She looked at him with something between pity and horror. "You should rest, doctor." But rest meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering who he'd been before the mask. Better to work until collapse, better to count corpses until the fever took coherent thought away entirely. Thomas Cray found him on day 34, unconscious in an alley near Bishopsgate. The body cart was half full, 6 wrapped corpses, 2 children loose and small. Cray lifted Nathaniel, surprisingly gentle for a man who handled death daily, and carried him back to the tannery lodging. When Nathaniel woke, Cray was sitting in the single chair, waiting. "You have it," Cray said, not a question. Nathaniel nodded. The movement sent pain shooting through his neck. "Will you stop working?" "No." "Why?" It was the same question Corvus had asked. Nathaniel gave the same answer. Because stopping means this meant nothing. Cray studied him, or studied the mask, since Nathaniel hadn't removed it, even unconscious. "It already means nothing," Cray said quietly. "We're burying 400 a day. Your counting doesn't slow it. Your treatments don't cure it. You're documenting an apocalypse, doctor. The records you're making will be burned with plague houses. No one will read them. Then why do you collect the bodies?" "Because someone has to. Because leaving them in the streets is worse." Cray stood, moved toward the door. "But I don't pretend it's noble. I do it because the parish pays, and when I die, which I will probably soon, someone else will push the cart. The work continues regardless of the worker." He left bread and wine on the table. The door closed. Nathaniel sat alone, fever climbing, and understood that Cray was right. Every word. The counting was futile. The treatments were useless. The mask was theater, elaborate costume for a performance no one wanted to watch. But he'd burned every other bridge. Failed husband, absent father, bankrupt physician. This was all he had left, walking through plague houses, marking doors, pretending documentation mattered. He ate the bread dry, drank the wine mixed with water from a pitcher that might have been clean or might have been contaminated. It didn't matter anymore. Wrote in his ledger with hands that trembled, "Day 34, Nathaniel Pest, symptoms, fever, bubo's neck and groin, confusion, chemical exposure complications, prognosis, death within 1 week." He listed himself like any other patient, name, symptoms, outcome pending. The hallucinations intensified. By day 36, he couldn't distinguish real from imagined. Catherine sat beside him while he worked, narrating his failures. Margaret appeared in plague houses, playing with the dead children, asking why Daddy didn't visit anymore. William Barrow followed him through streets, butcher's apron still bloody, discussing the economics of meat distribution during civic collapse. 3 pence a pound for mutton, Barrow explained as Nathaniel recorded a family of 5 dead in one room. But who's buying? The rich fled. The poor have no coin. Meat rots. All rots. "Stop," Nathaniel said. "Can't stop rot, doctor. It's the nature of flesh." A constable asked who he was talking to. Nathaniel gestured vaguely at the corpses. The constable marked something in his own ledger and moved away quickly. That night, Nathaniel tried to treat himself. Medical training, however inadequate, provided some procedure. He heated water, cleaned a lancet with vinegar, positioned a mirror to see the bubo on his neck. The swelling was massive, black, hard, hot to touch. Lancing it might drain infection, might reduce pressure, might buy another few days. He pressed the blade to skin. The beak of the mask blocked his view. He removed the mask, first time in 4 days, and the room spun. The air was too thin, too clean, missing the chemical foundation he'd learned to breathe through. His reflection in the mirror was skeletal, eyes sunken, skin yellowed with jaundice. Chemical burns had spread to his cheeks. "You look like me," Catherine's hallucination said from behind him. "When I was dying." "You're not dead," Nathaniel said. "You're in Bristol with Margaret and a merchant husband." "I died when you chose poverty over family. You killed me. You're good at killing." He pressed the lancet deeper. Blood and pus fountained. The pain was extraordinary, white-hot, blinding, and he bit his tongue hard enough to taste copper. The bubo drained. He packed it with a poultice of onion and herbs, wrapped his neck with cloth strips, put the mask back on because his face in the mirror was unbearable. The fever spiked that night. He dreamed of Margaret, age 5, asking why he smelled like death. He tried to explain about miasma theory, about bad air and good herbs, about serving the sick. She shook her head. "You smell like you're already dead, Daddy." He woke screaming inside the mask. The sound echoed in the beak, trapped and amplified, inhuman. Day 37 brought clarity, the kind that comes before death, when the body surrenders and the mind briefly sharpens. Nathaniel understood he had perhaps 3 days remaining. Maybe less. The buboes were spreading. New lumps in his armpits. His groin swelling so badly he could barely walk. Fever constant. The chemical exposure had damaged something permanent. His hands shook continuously. His vision blurred even without the mask. His lungs burned with each breath. He wrote a letter to Catherine. Real Catherine, not the hallucination. He didn't have her address, but he wrote it anyway, sitting at the small table in pre-dawn darkness, hand cramping around the quill. Catherine, I am dying of plague in London. This will not surprise you. I'm dying as I lived, choosing principle over practicality, righteousness over sense. You were right to leave. You were right about everything. I think of Margaret constantly. I've thought of her every day for 2 years. I imagine she's forgotten me. This is appropriate. I was never the father she deserved. You asked me once why I couldn't simply charge fair prices, see fewer patients, build a stable practice like other physicians. I told you it was about ethics. The truth is simpler. I was afraid of being ordinary. I wanted to be exceptional, the doctor who served the poor, who put humanity above profit. I wanted to be remembered as good. Instead, I am remembered as nothing. The man who abandoned his family for pride, the plague doctor who counted corpses and called it service. I hope you are happy in Bristol. I hope Margaret is happy. I hope she marries someone practical who understands money and provides security, someone unlike me. I loved you. I love you still. This changes nothing, fixes nothing, means nothing. But I wanted you to know. Nathaniel. He folded the letter, sealed it with wax melted over a candle, wrote Catherine Finch, Bristol on the exterior, though he had no actual address. Then he opened the mask, unbuckled the back, separated the beak from the hood, and slipped the letter inside the herb chamber, folded small, tucked between lavender and clove. It fit perfectly in the space where aromatics were meant to filter death. He sealed the mask again, put it on. The letter crinkled slightly when he moved his head. Better, Corvus said in his father's voice. Die with confession, die honest. I'm not dead yet, Nathaniel said. Close enough. He worked 3 more days. Day 38, 4 houses, 9 bodies. Day 39, 2 houses, 3 bodies, couldn't walk more. Day 40, 1 house, 1 body, collapsed on the threshold. The final house belonged to a child, a boy, perhaps 10, dead alone. Parents already buried. The boy was in bed, positioned carefully, hands folded on his chest. Someone had tried to make it dignified. Nathaniel recorded the name from a paper pinned to the blanket. Thomas Webb, age 11, no family remaining. He sat on the floor beside the bed. Couldn't stand anymore. The fever was cooking his brain. The buboes had burst in multiple locations, leaking through bandages, soaking his shirt. He was rotting from inside out. "Thomas," he said to the dead boy, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I couldn't help. I'm sorry I helped no one." The boy didn't answer. The hallucinations had stopped. That was how he knew he was truly dying, when the dead no longer spoke, when the mind finally surrendered its desperate attempts to fill silence with invented company. He took out his ledger, wrote final entries with handwriting barely legible. Day 40. Nathaniel Pest, real name Nathaniel Finch, age 37, plague doctor. Symptoms: multiple buboes burst, fever exceeds measurement, chemical poisoning, organ failure imminent. Prognosis: death within hours. Total deaths recorded, 347. Total saved, 2, perhaps 3. Ratio unacceptable. Service inadequate. Life wasted. He paused, added, "Forgive me." Who he was asking? God, Catherine, Margaret, the 347 dead he'd failed to save. He didn't specify. Thomas Cray found him at sunset. The body cart bell rang outside, then stopped. Footsteps on stairs. The door opened. Cray stood in the threshold, looking at Nathaniel collapsed against the bed, mask still on, clutching the ledger. "Dr. Pest," Cray said quietly. "Finch," Nathaniel corrected. "Nathaniel Finch. Remember the name." "I'll remember." Cray approached, knelt. "Do you want the mask removed?" Nathaniel considered, shook his head slightly. "Easier to die as the bird than the man." "As you wish." Cray sat with him as the light failed, didn't speak, didn't touch, simply present, the only witness to an unremarkable death in a city where 400 died daily. Nathaniel's last coherent thought was of Margaret, not the hallucination, the real child. 5 years old, somewhere in Bristol, hopefully happy, hopefully never knowing her father died in a plague house wearing a bird mask, clutching a ledger of the dead, having saved almost no one. The mask fogged one final time with his breath, then cleared, then stayed clear. Thomas Cray recorded the death in his own ledger, lifted the body, light, wasted, and carried it to the cart. Per protocol, the mask would be burned with the corpse. Per protocol, the plague doctor's belongings would be destroyed. Per protocol, no one would read the ledger of 347 deaths documented by a man who'd wanted desperately to be remembered as good. The letter inside the mask's beak, addressed to Catherine Finch in Bristol, burned at dawn with lavender and clove and leather and the man who'd thought isolation might be purpose. Thomas Cray pushed his cart through Aldgate at dawn, bell silent. The protocol was clear. Plague doctor remains required immediate cremation, no ceremony, no burial ground. Too contaminated, too symbolic. Let the birdmen burn with their failures. Nathaniel Pest, Nathaniel Finch, lay wrapped in the leather coat that had been his uniform and shroud. The mask remained buckled to his face. Cray had tried once to remove it, thought better. Some men died as themselves, others died as what they had become. The doctor had chosen the bird. The plague fire burned in a field past Whitechapel, maintained constantly by conscripted laborers who worked in shifts and drank heavily to manage the smell. Cray delivered his cargo: 1 plague doctor, complete costume, 1 ledger of deaths, 1 wooden case of medical instruments. The firekeeper, a gap-toothed man named Morris who'd been a baker before the plague, accepted the body without comment. "Pest?" Morris asked, recognizing the distinctive mask. "Finch," Cray corrected. "Nathaniel Finch. He asked to be remembered by his real name." Morris made a note in his own ledger. "Firekeepers tracked what burned, a record of records destroyed." "Right then. Finch. Plague doctor? Day 40 of service, I expect?" 40 exactly. They never last longer." Morris gestured to 2 laborers. They lifted the wrapped body, carried it to the fire. The flames were enormous, 15 feet high, fed by cartloads of infected dead, burning hot enough that the heat pushed back anyone approaching closer than 20 yards. They threw Nathaniel Finch into the fire. The leather coat caught first, smoking and curling, then the mask. The The wax seal melted. The beak began to burn. Inside, the letter to Catherine, folded small, hidden among herbs, ignited and became ash. Words unread. I loved you. I love you still. This changes nothing, fixes nothing, means nothing. The glass eye lenses cracked from heat. The lavender and clove and camphor released one final wave of aromatics. The smell of the miasma theory. The smell of futile protection. The smell Nathaniel had breathed for 40 days until he forgot what clean air tasted like. Thomas Cray watched until the body was unrecognizable. Then he turned his cart and went back to work. 50 more houses on today's list. The plague didn't pause for grief. Agnes Morley survived, the seamstress, 42 years old, who'd asked the plague doctor his name and received no answer. She recovered in a house that had killed her husband, 2 daughters, and her mother. When the fever broke and the buboes began to heal, slowly, leaving scars like burn marks, she emerged into a London that felt evacuated. She returned to her trade. Someone needed to sew shrouds. Demand was limitless. She worked 16-hour days, fingers cramping around needles, stitching cloth for bodies she'd never seen. Anonymous dead, wrapped and burned, documented in ledgers that no one would read. She thought often of the plague doctor who'd treated her, the one who'd lanced her buboes, clumsy but trying, and told her to drink water, to rest, to survive if possible. He'd looked like death in that mask, sounded like death. But his hands had shaken with something that might have been fear, or might have been compassion. She asked after him once, weeks later, when a different plague doctor came through to mark a neighbor's door. This one was younger, mask less worn. The doctor before, Agnes said. Tall man, very thin. He came in September. Is he still working? Peste? The young doctor's voice was muffled through his beak. Dead. Day 40. They all die around day 40. The mask doesn't protect. Nothing protects. Did he have a family? Don't know. Don't ask. We're not meant to be people, mistress. We're meant to be birds. Agnes made a shroud that night and burned it in her fireplace as offering. She didn't know his real name. Didn't know if he'd had children or a wife or debts or dreams. But he'd tried to help her when help was futile, and that deserved acknowledgement. The shroud burned clean, the ashes mixed with soot from 1,000 other fires. In Bristol, Catherine Finch, now Catherine Mercer, married 3 years to a textile merchant named William, received no letter. She would never receive the letter. It had burned in a plague fire with the man who'd written it, hidden inside a mask designed to fight death with perfume. She thought of Nathaniel occasionally, brief thoughts usually prompted by Margaret asking questions about her father. Where is Daddy? Margaret would ask, age 5, too young to understand abandonment or bankruptcy. In London, Catherine would say, working. When will he visit? I don't know, darling. The truth, that Nathaniel had disappeared into debt and pride, that he'd chosen righteousness over family, that she'd left him because staying meant watching their daughter grow up hungry, was too complex for a 5-year-old. Easier to say he was working, easier to let Margaret imagine a father who was busy rather than absent by choice. News of the London plague reached Bristol through merchants and travelers. Casualty numbers, 100,000 dead, 1/4 of the city. The rich had fled. The poor had died in masses. Plague doctors worked until they collapsed. Catherine heard these reports and felt a cold certainty settle in her chest. Nathaniel would have stayed, she told William one night. You don't know that, William said, pragmatic as always. I do. He would have seen it as duty. He would have volunteered. Then he's likely dead. Catherine nodded. She'd grieved their marriage years ago. Grieving the man himself felt redundant. But she wondered sometimes, late at night when Margaret was sleeping and William was snoring and the house was quiet, if Nathaniel had thought of them at the end, if he'd regretted choosing poverty over security, if he'd missed his daughter. She would never know. The letter that might have told her had become smoke over a field in Whitechapel, words dissolving into London air that was finally, slowly, clearing of plague. The Great Plague ended not with cure, but with exhaustion. By February 1666, the death rate slowed. Not because treatment improved, it hadn't. Not because people learned prevention, they hadn't. Simply because plague ran its course. The susceptible died. The survivors developed immunity. The disease moved on to other cities, other countries, other populations. London began rebuilding. Families returned from country estates. Shops reopened. Churches held services again. The body carts stopped rolling. The plague fires were extinguished. The mass graves were covered and eventually built over. The plague doctors disappeared. Those who'd survived, few, perhaps a dozen out of 50 hired, removed their masks and returned to anonymity. Some went back to medical practice. Others left medicine entirely, traumatized beyond recovery. The masks were burned. The leather coats were destroyed. The ledgers of the dead were filed in parish records, unread, gathering dust. Nathaniel Finch's ledger, 347 deaths recorded, 2 possibly saved, was filed at St. Botolph without Aldgate. No one read it. No one would read it. His documentation of suffering, his careful notes on symptom progression, his increasingly illegible handwriting tracking his own decline, all archived in a basement room that smelled of mildew and neglect. His name appeared once more in official records. Parish Payment Ledger, October 1665. N. Pest, Finch, Plague Doctor, 40 days service, deceased. Payment £8, delivered to estate, no estate found. Payment as sheeted to parish. £8 for 40 days of walking through death, £8 for 347 documented corpses, £8 for dying in a bird mask, clutching a record book, having saved almost no one. The money went to church repairs. Thomas Cray survived the plague. He pushed his body cart until December, when the death rate dropped enough that 1 cart was sufficient for the entire city. Before he died 18 months later, he wrote his own account of the plague years. It included 1 paragraph about Nathaniel Finch. Dr. Nathaniel Finch was among the few genuine physicians who became plague doctors. He died day 40, standard duration. He asked to be remembered by his real name rather than his plague name. He was kind in a time that had no use for kindness. He tried to help when help was impossible. Cray's account was never published. By the time it reached a historical society in 1809, the names meant nothing. Little Alice Heath, the 8-year-old who'd screamed at Nathaniel's unmasked face, lived to 73. She spoke of the plague only once, late in life. There was a doctor who wore a bird mask. He took it off when I asked. His face frightened me. He looked more dead than alive. But I survived, and he didn't. I suppose that's a kind of bravery. Margaret Finch never learned how her father died. She grew up as Margaret Mercer, became a teacher, married a clerk. When she was 30, her mother told her, "Your father was a physician. He stayed in London during the plague. He likely died there." Margaret named her first son Nathaniel. The name continued. The man it honored remained forgotten. In 1966, a historian found Nathaniel Finch's ledger. The final entry, Day 40, Nathaniel Pest, real name Nathaniel Finch, age 37, plague doctor. Total deaths recorded, 347. Total saved, 2, perhaps 3. Ratio unacceptable. Service inadequate. Life wasted. Forgive me. The historian included it in a footnote. Plague doctors kept detailed records until their own deaths, as evidenced by the ledger of N. Finch. 353 years after Nathaniel Finch burned in a plague fire wearing a bird mask, his name appears here, not as hero or failure, simply as a man who tried to help when help was impossible, who isolated himself so completely that he forgot his own face, who died believing his service meant nothing. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps counting the dead during apocalypse is meaningless. But someone must push the cart, someone must mark the doors, someone must record the names, even if the records burn. Nathaniel Finch did that work for 40 days. He saved almost no one. He died unmourned, unremarkable in a time when 400 died daily. But he asked to be remembered by his real name. So here it is. Nathaniel Finch, physician, plague doctor, father, husband, man, He existed, he tried, he died wearing a bird mask because removing it meant admitting the mask never protected anyone. The loneliness behind the beak was absolute. The courage required to wear it anyway deserves acknowledgement.